The most senior lawyers in your own administration and on your campaign told you that after you'd lost more than 60 legal challenges, that it was over. Why did you ignore them and decide to listen to a new outside group?
Because I didn't respect them.
You'd hired
lawyers,
them.
Sure, but that doesn't mean, you hire them, you never met these people, you get a recommendation, they turn out to be rhinos or they turn out to be not so good. In many cases, I didn't respect them, but I did respect others. I respected many others that said the election was rigged.
You called some of your outside lawyers, you said they had crazy theories. Why were you listening to them? Were you listening to them because they were telling you what you wanted to hear?
You know who I listened to myself? I saw what happened. I watched that election, and I thought the election was over at 10 o'clock in the evening.
You were listening to your instincts.
My instincts are a big part of it. That's been the thing that's gotten me to where I am, my instincts. But I also listen to people. There are many lawyers. I could give you many books. There are books that are written on how the election was rigged. There are numerous books that were written on how the election was rigged.
Just to be clear, were you listening to your lawyer's advice or were you listening to your own instincts?
I was listening to different people, and when I added it all up, the election was rigged. There are books
that are written. Were you calling the shots, though?
In fact, Molly Hemingway wrote a great book.
But were you calling
Rigged.
the shots ultimately?
Excuse me. Molly Hemingway, who's highly respected and great, she wrote a book, a best-selling book called Rigged.
Were you calling the shots, though, Mr. President, ultimately?
As to whether or not I believed it was rigged, oh, sure.
Okay.
It was my decision, but I listened to some people. Some people said that. Like guys like Bill Barr, he was a stiff, but he wasn't there at the time. But he didn't do his job because he was afraid. You know what he was afraid of? He was afraid of being impeached. He was petrified to be impeached. And how do you not get impeached? Don't do anything.
I really hope you caught the part where Trump is asked whether he was following his lawyer's advice when he tried to overturn the 2020 election. And he says, quote, "It was my decision," because I'll tell you who definitely caught it. Jack Smith and the team prosecuting Trump's case. And so now, when Donald Trump ends up in court for the D.C. case, which is scheduled to start in March of 2024, whereas any other client would be falling over himself to rely on his advice of counsel defense, that he was merely acting at the direction of people much smarter than him, and had he known that their counsel was so ill-advised, he would never have heeded it. Now, because Trump decided to admit on air that it was a unilateral decision by him, he won't be able to blame his lawyers and instead will shoulder the blame himself. So if you're wondering who would be dumb enough to try and incite an insurrection against the US government, it's the guy who then obliterated his own defense for that very act on national TV. It really is something to watch Trump's limitless hubris come back and bite him in the ass. All he had to do here was concede that maybe, but for a fleeting moment, he allowed someone else to run the show. And yet his ego is so incredibly fragile, he would rather usurp all the credit, even if doing so means also shouldering all the blame. Is it incredibly pathetic? Yes. Does it also bode really, really poorly for Trump in court? Also yes. And you'll notice too that he took the opportunity to attack his former Attorney General, Bill Barr, suggesting that he wasn't willing to go along with Trump's plan for fear of being impeached, which, by the way, is usually how it works. People generally avoid breaking the law, what with the range of consequences that would await them on the other end. Bill Barr was actually asked about this exact point, and here's what he had to say.
He wouldn't listen to all the lawyers in the department in various departments or the White House that had those responsibilities, or his campaign. He would search for a lawyer who would give him the advice he wanted. But I'm not even sure you would characterize what Eastman said as advice. I mean, it'd be interesting to see, but I interpret some of what he was saying essentially was, well, it's unclear here and you can make this argument. I'm not saying the courts would accept it and so forth. And you act on that at your own hazard.
In other words, Trump would expressly surround himself with lawyers who told him exactly what he wanted to hear, and yet even though their advice was by design what he wanted it to be, still he wasn't smart enough to blame them. If only Trump was as good at overturning elections as he was at destroying his court cases, he might still be president right now. And yet, in case you thought that maybe Trump's words weren't that damaging, here's Adam Schiff, who helped prosecute Trump's first impeachment in the House as lead impeachment counsel, driving home just how badly Trump screwed himself here.
First, your reaction to what you heard the former president say just a little while ago on Meet the Press. It was his decision to try to overturn the 2020 election results. It sounds like he's taking full ownership here.
It sounds like he is. I think this is probably music to the ears of the special prosecutor, watching these interviews compiling further evidence to present against the president. It's probably also good news for the prosecutors in Georgia. Here he is taking responsibility, saying it was his decision, essentially, that he was ignoring the lawyers who were saying, the respected lawyers who were saying things that he didn't want to hear, and going with the crazies because it affirmed what he wanted to believe.
And so it's not only the D.C. case where Trump stands to lose, it's also the Fulton County, Georgia state prosecution, which relies on a number of the same facts. And just like Jack Smith can present this TV clip in his case, so can Fani Willis in Georgia as part of her RICO case against Trump. It's almost impressive how Trump can screw himself over in so many different cases with just a few moments on national television. And by the way, if you're wondering whether Trump will take the stand in these trials, I think this brief moment probably answers that question. Trump will either be incapable of telling the truth, thereby opening himself up to perjury charges, or he actually will tell the truth, which is arguably worse than the perjury charges because it'll betray his abject guilt. Either way, if he is allowed to speak in court, then he's all but guaranteed to sink his own case. And so while I'm not big on betting, I'd say we're more likely to see Trump get drafted as the next starting running back for the New York Jets than for his attorneys to allow him to take the stand in his own trial. But at the end of the day, this is what we should expect from a defendant for whom the facts aren't on his side. We know that Trump lied about the events surrounding his election loss. We know that he was told the truth by his advisors and attorneys and staff members. We know that he opted to barrel forward with these illegal schemes anyway. We know that he knew that those schemes wouldn't pass constitutional muster because he was told it. We know he didn't care because his goal was solely to cling onto power by any means necessary. And yes, we know that it was all his decision. So he can and will offer up whatever defenses he doesn't manage to blow up on national television first, but at the end of the day, he doesn't have a leg to stand on because he committed these crimes out in the open. And the evidence presented in court will prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, regardless of what desperate tactics Trump uses to defend himself. He made his bed, now he has to lie in it. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to the channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.